thrilled to have Marylou Palmer with us, and she is going to take it away with her talk, The Prodigal Formula. Thank you, Marylou.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning from Chatham, Massachusetts, the end of the earth, the end of Cape Cod. We are about a block away from the Atlantic Ocean, and it's been a lovely morning. You're right, the darkness is gone and everything's bright and beautiful. And as I reflect on that quote, our greatest fear is not that we're inadequate. Our greatest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. As a unity minister for 20 years, I worked in 8 different churches during that time as a transitional ministry specialist. I worked with churches who, for some reason or another, they lost, they fired, kicked out, had their minister retire, and the organization felt inadequate to go forward without getting some help. And so I did that. I worked in a local church in Flagstaff, Arizona, which was my first church, but I was following a transitional minister. And so I had the experience of what it's like to be in a spiritual community that's struggling. And after struggling with that church, I decided that I needed more skills and went back to school and got the credentials for transition. And then I went on to work with 7 other churches in that process of restoring harmony and balance and finding their way. And so I've been doing transitional work for over 20 years. And every time I engage with that, it's always because we feel inadequate, unequal to the task before us. And so in some way, that process, individually and collectively, we shrink. We become less than who we are. It's as if we get confused and all we see are the obstacles in our way. We don't see that bright shining day of clearly being able to move forward. And now we're in a collective transition. You know, the world changed as we engaged in this pandemic response. It was, I think, as a amateur historian, I think it was on the scale of a 9/11 experience, a day that shook our world and transformed it, and that was 20 years ago. Well, last year we had an experience that plunged all of us into this uncertainty, unsure. Are we going to be sick? Are you going to be the one that's going to make me sick? You know, we just created all sorts of shrinking experiences. And now we have put our faith in a vaccine. We have put our faith in strategies that, okay, the experts are telling us that it's safer for us to gather, and we're getting ready to, as a spiritual community, you guys are getting ready to shift from being in your little Zoom cocoons to getting to be together as a spiritual community. And even though we're excited about the future, we still have some issues that are bringing us into the next experience. And those issues can keep us from feeling confident, of exploring our future in a powerful, dynamic way. And The thing about transitions that I learned is that you always start with an ending. And it's the time between the ending before you get to the new beginning that's called transition. Well, the big question always in transitional work is, how do you know when you've developed that new normal? And you kind of have to have a vision of what that new beginning looks like. Now, there may be little new beginnings, when we got our vaccinations and felt more comfortable to be out in the world without having to have masks to sit behind. That was a transition point. It felt like a new normal was being created. The idea of being able to come together in spiritual community and sing song and hear everybody sing that song. That's going to be a different normal. And it's going to be one that we're going to be relieved to hear the beautiful voices and the croaky ones, and we're going to just rejoice in being together one more time, and it's just going to feel so good. But until we come to clarity of what that land of milk and honey is going to look like, it's kind of hard for us to get there. Doing this work of transitional ministry, what I found is that the first step that I did with the community is to help them to identify what are the things that need to get resolved before you can step into that new beginning, before you're ready to hire a new minister. For some of one church I worked with in Key West, their issue was they had to have a building. And they had been 4 years since the hurricane, and their building actually melted. It was an interesting construction because it was paper, and it was paper in between the walls, and literally the rain and the wind collapsed the building so that the walls fell down, and the first thing they had to do was take out all the valuable things, and then they had to literally clean the debris of the church. And then in that debris of the church, all that was left was a concrete addition that had been put on the building. And so they were left with an empty, flat slab, and that was their church. And they had, at the end of the previous minister's term, they had been wrestling with what to do and how to do it. And so for the next year and a half after I got there, we worked with that community to come into clarity of what they needed to do to rebuild the church. Are they going to rebuild the church, or are they going to buy a new church? They ended up buying a new church. We ended up doing renovations. It was the most exciting thing I'd ever done as a transitional, was to get to help them get there. But they felt like, as a community, they needed to have that church structure and to get through the really hard decisions of what do we do and how do we do it, and are we going to rebuild, and what are the things. And they decided that they needed to have that new building in place so that they could go forward in hiring a minister. And part of it was, how are we going to be able to afford it? That was their big issue. And so after they figured out how they could afford it, it just kind of tumbled into, okay, we got to buy this, we got to do this now. And then they called a search team. Out of that whole time of working with 8 different organizations in doing this transitional work, only one of them failed. And they sort of had failed before I got there, and they thought that I could resurrect them, but it didn't work out that way. So transition times are very, very chaotic and cautious and uncertain. And it is a crisis that is dangerous because you don't know what it's going to turn out to be. So the most important thing is to resolve those unspoken issues. So as a spiritual community, it's going to be a great day when you can all get together. But I'm guessing there's going to be some things that are going to show up. Like, can we afford this? What do we do now? How do we include people who have been part of our church on Zoom and aren't going to be able to physically present? And how does that work? And what are we going to do? And so in that process of discovery of what the issues are, the obstacles, and being able to see clearly the obstacles in our way, we have to come up with a strategy of what that new normal is going to look like. So one of the keys to figuring out the issues are some of the dynamics that have been going on individually and collectively for all of you. And in that process, there's got to be a way to, instead of playing small, being willing to talk about them. And so I want to share with you sort of what's been my theme during this transition. And it's that transitional process of trying to figure out how to truly not be so angry and frustrated at the way the world is working. I don't know about you, but this last year has given me such eye-opening experiences to the way the world works. I've been disgusted, humiliated, disappointed, frustrated, annoyed, angry, so angry I'm yelling back at the television. That's how angry I am. That's not me. That's not me when I'm filled with my spiritual consciousness. That's me playing small. And so I had to come up with a process of how do I go forward. And someone in my reading said that the synopsis of A Course in Miracles can be said this way. It's bless them, heal me, for thinking that they have to be different so that I can be okay. Bless them by right of consciousness. Bless them. God bless them. They need to do what they need to do. Okay. But heal me for thinking that you got to be different so I can be okay. So that's my stumbling block. That's my process that as I go forward in this transition back to normal, I had to discover a way through that. And our teacher, our way shower, Jesus, tells a story of being lost in a wilderness of our own making. Lost in the wilderness of our own making is a story that was a quintessential story of his ministry. It was the story of the lost son, the prodigal son who claimed his spiritual, not integrity, but his spiritual inheritance. And he went to his father and said, "Give me what is mine." And the father did. And when he got his spiritual nourishment, the provisions, everything, his inheritance from his father, he set off on a journey. And it was a journey of his own makings. The story goes, he wasted everything on wine, women, song, whatever. And he found himself in a place where he was in the worst place that a good Jewish boy could ever find himself. Having to hang out with pigs, feeding them, and wanting for the pigs food. And so he discovered at that point, I could have a different experience. And in that thought of I could have a different experience, he turned his direction back to his father. Even the servants in my father's house do better than this. So I'll go to my father. And when he's far off, his father comes rushing out and accepts him and gives him all of the spiritual inheritance all over again. Of the ring, of the cloak, of the shoes. Those are all the guidance, the knowledge, the power and authority. Every one of those were symbols of his spiritual inheritance as his father. And in the process of him coming home to himself, coming home to his family, the next issue showed up. The next issue was the elder brother, who, hearing the party going on, is like, what's happening? What's going on? And he goes to his father's house and says, what's going on here? How come you're doing this? You've never given it to me. And why would you do this? This one abandoned us. This one ran off and spent everything unwisely. And he's, all that I have is yours, the father said. All that I have is yours. And he still is so angry and beside himself he can't stand it. The prodigal formula is a prodigal formula that can work for the younger son, for the elder son, and even for the compassionate father. Because in this story of the prodigal son, it's really a story of how each one of us, whether we're son or father, can become compassionate. There's John Shelby Spong once, I heard him once speak about this story, and he said it's a story of loving wastefully. God loves wastefully. And God wants us to live full on, full out. And sometimes when we are doing that, we have to learn our own limitations, our own foibles, and not rely on our own best interest and our own understanding. We need to go to the Father, and the Father's guidance and love and wisdom is there to support us. And sometimes when we're lost without provision, all we need to do is turn to the Father. And then there's other times where we think, hey, I got this. We're doing fine. I'm doing everything according to the book. I'm doing everything just fine. But what about these guys? These are Johnny-come-latelys, and what are they doing here? They don't know. They haven't been through the struggle. And even for the elder brother, that prodigal journey is there. Because his challenge was he didn't ask for what he wanted. And then he bitched because he didn't get it. Who are we? What are we doing? Struggling with the transition from the way it used to be into our new normal. And the struggle can be resolved as we go back to spiritual principle. It's ask. Ask for what we want. I've come to understand that all too often what we do is we ask for what we don't want. We don't want them to do this, or we don't want that to happen, or we don't want this to happen. It's like, okay, you got to turn it around and ask for what you do want. And being willing to ask for what we want, believe that we will get it. Believe that we will be guided, and trust the process will unfold in front of us. Now, the asking for what we want is a key. That elder brother situation, when we're in that position of not asking for what we want, there's a line in James that says, you receive not because you ask not. So we need to ask. We need to consciously set our sights on a new beginning. A new beginning. So my current prayer is bless them by right of consciousness and heal us so that we can work together to create a new future. Together as a community, together as a state, together as a new country, a new nation, and together as a new world. Bless them, heal me, so that we can work together. The challenge is that after we ask, sometimes we get so wrapped up in the busyness and the doingness that we forget that we get to relax. How is none of our business. So part of the formula of the prodigals is to ask, believe, and relax. And more will be given, more information. The next step in the journey will unfold. Today, the obstacles look like this. We resolve this issue and something else is going to pop up. And release the fears. Release our playing small. And rejoice that we can come together. I read a commentary by a Jewish scholar that teaches New Testament history. And her take on this prodigal son story was, it was to come, eat, and rejoice. That's the moral of the story, is to come together. Let us eat and be nourished and rejoice, because that's the key to understanding how we can heal. Enough to listen to one another, to work together one another. The journey is unfolding before us. The Course in Miracles talks about that our job is to be merciful even as our Father is merciful. And that the best defense in this is to not attack another's position, but rather to defend the truth. That we're all valuable, that we're all important, that the light casts out all darkness when we stand in that light. So the prodigal son story is our story. It's the story of the elder brother when we're just fit to be tied because what somebody else is doing just doesn't seem to be doing it right. It's the story of the prodigal father who can love wastefully. You see, one of the dynamics that I learned in all of this is the prodigal, the definition of prodigal is spending recklessly. It is wastefully extravagant. And the father in the story is wastefully extravagant in his willingness to be compassionate, to be understanding, to open his space back up to include all of his sons, no matter what they're doing, all the craziness, doesn't matter. So our challenge is to figure out that new normal. What is it we're looking for? What is it that's standing in our way? And how are we going to get there together? So I want to close with a rabbi story of how do you know that the night is over and the day has begun. And the students were grappling with this story, and they thought they understood what the story was, why it was so important, because after all, there are prayers that can only be done at the beginning of the day. And then there are prayers and rituals that can only be done at the night And so it was important for them to know when the day and night shifted. So the brightest of the students offered the answer, saying, "Rabbi, when I look out in the fields, I can distinguish my field from the field of my neighbors. That's when the night has ended and the day has begun." And a second student said, "Rabbi, when I look out into the fields and I can see my house and I can tell it's my house, not my neighbor's house, that's when the night has ended and the day has begun." A third student says, "Rabbi, when I can see an animal in the distance and I can tell if it's a cow or a sheep or a horse, that's when the night has ended and the day has begun." And the fourth student says, "Well, Rabbi, when I can see a flower, I can make out the colors of the flower, whether they're red or blue or green. That's when I know the night has ended and the day has begun." And each of the answers brought a sadder and more severe frown to the rabbi's face until he shouted and said, "No, none of you understand. You only divide. You divide your house from the house of your neighbor. You divide your field from your neighbor's field. You distinguish one kind of animal from another. You separate one color from another. That's all you can do? Divide, separate, split the world into pieces? Isn't the world broken enough? Isn't the world split enough into fragments? Is that what the Torah is for? No, my students, that's not the way at all." And the students were shocked. Rabbi, tell us, how do we know that the night has ended and the day has begun?" And the rabbi looked steerily in the faces of his students and with a voice gentle and imploring said, "When you can look into the face of the person standing next to you, and you can see that person as brother or sister, then finally the night is over and the day has begun." My dear friends, I see you as beloved. I see you as precious, as guided and directed by the living God within each of you. And I know that each of you will find your way into this new normal, resolving the places in you where you play small, resolving those issues for you where you hold back, resolving the way that you too can say with ease and grace, "Bless them, heal me, that I can be as God created me to be." Namaste. So I'm going to invite us to just take a moment and take this message into your own interior experience. As we close our eyes and become still and quiet and go to that inward place and ask for those obstacles to be made clear. Ask for the good that we desire. And as a good unity truth student, as a spiritual, conscious, and aware person, after we ask, we can say thank you. Thank you. Let me relax into this moment. And feel the love, the light shining in us, through us, as us. And with the next breath, I invite you to bring whatever obstacles that are in your way to bless them. Bless them one by one. Bless them by right of consciousness, that they too will work themselves out. Untie the knots that have bound them into plain, small, limited. And as that situation is sent peacefully on its way, allow another obstacle to come forward and bless it by right of consciousness. Bless it to the resolved in a way that perfectly outworks the issues. And if this one scares you a little bit, go back and ask that that centering confidence be restored. That I know the truth about me. That God's provisions of knowingness and love, God's provisions of love and compassion will allow me to create a peaceful passage. And so centered and poised in this confidence, this peace, we can invite that next obstacle to come forward, only to be blessed. And if in your own consciousness of fear and worry and doubt and debt, it gets triggered, be confident that the light of God shining in and through you now is bigger than any obstacle. And that this process of coming again to the Father is only a thought away. That we as a nation, as a society, as a civilization, are more powerful than we can imagine. That the good that we seek is seeking us. And that truly, all is truly well, despite any appearances to the contrary. That we are God's gift to the world. And that our playing small does not serve. And that every time we stand in the light, in the love, in the knowingness that all is well, that we, by our very presence, gives permission to others to be healed, to be the light in their world. So breathing this in, breathing this out, we allow it to be. And so it is. Amen. And when you're ready, come back to this place and time and see the world with new eyes, with the joy of the light that is within you. And it's not in some of you, it's in all of us. And we rejoice. And together we say, thank you, God.
Thank you, Marylou. That was beautiful. Thank you so much. So now we're going to